There was never a moment in human history when the night sky was truly empty. Long before we built cities, before we learned to write, and long before we understood what stars actually were, our ancestors would step outside at the end of the day and look upward. They saw patterns where we now see constellations. They saw gods where we now see galaxies. And in the silence above them, they encountered a question that has followed our species ever since. Are we alone? It is a remarkably old question, older than science, older than philosophy, perhaps even older than civilization itself. Somewhere, tens of thousands of years ago, a human being sat beside a fire, beneath a sky untouched by artificial light, and wondered whether another pair of eyes might be looking back. I often think about that person. They would have known nothing of exoplanets, nothing of black holes, nothing of the Milky Way stretching across hundreds of thousands of trillions of miles. And yet, despite everything we have learned since then, we remain companions in the same mystery. There is something comforting about that. Humanity has changed enormously over the centuries. We crossed oceans, built observatories, walked upon the moon, sent machines beyond the edge of the solar system. But the questions we carry with us have remained surprisingly familiar. Who are we? Why are we here? And, perhaps most importantly, is there anyone else? For most of history, it seemed impossible that we could be alone. After all, the sky appeared too large, too full, too alive. Ancient civilizations gave names to the wandering lights that crossed the heavens. The Babylonians tracked them. The Egyptians wrote about them. The Greeks imagined entire worlds hidden among the stars. Even then, there was an instinctive feeling that a universe this vast could not have been created for a single species. And perhaps that instinct is understandable. Tonight, there are more stars above your head than any human being could count in a lifetime. And yet, every one of them is only a tiny fraction of what exists beyond our sight. Our galaxy alone contains hundreds of billions of stars. The observable universe contains trillions of galaxies. If every grain of sand on every beach on Earth represented a star, there would still be more stars in the cosmos than grains beneath your feet. Numbers like these are difficult to comprehend. They slip quietly through the mind. The human imagination was never designed to hold a universe this large. And perhaps that is why the possibility of being alone feels so strange. It would be one thing if the universe were small, if the stars ended just beyond the moon, if reality consisted of a handful of worlds suspended in a modest sky. But that is not the universe we inherited. Instead, we find ourselves living in a cosmos so vast that light itself requires billions of years to cross it. A universe that has existed for nearly 14 billion years. A universe capable of producing galaxies, black holes, nebulae, and stars so enormous that our sun would disappear inside them without a trace. And still, no answer, no signal, no visitors, only silence. There is a peculiar loneliness hidden within that silence. Not an unpleasant loneliness, more like standing in a great cathedral after everyone else has gone home. The space itself feels meaningful. You cannot help but feel that something should be there. And perhaps that is what humanity has experienced for most of its existence. A feeling that the universe is trying to tell us something. A feeling that we have simply not learned how to listen. Science, of course, eventually joined the conversation. In the last few decades alone, we have discovered thousands of planets orbiting distant stars. Some are larger than Jupiter. Others are rocky worlds, not unlike our own. A few even exist within what astronomers call the habitable zone, a region where temperatures may allow liquid water to exist. Every new discovery seems to whisper the same possibility. Maybe life is common. Maybe the universe is overflowing with civilizations. Maybe, somewhere at this very moment, another species is sitting beneath an unfamiliar sky, asking exactly the same question. And yet, despite all our telescopes and satellites, despite every radio antenna pointed toward the stars, we have found nothing conclusive, only possibilities, only maybes. There is an extraordinary tension in that, because the universe simultaneously appears too large for us to be alone and too silent for us to feel accompanied. And so humanity remains suspended between two ideas. The first is comforting. We are not alone. The second is far more difficult to accept. What if we are? Imagine, for a moment, that tomorrow every observatory on Earth reached the same conclusion. No hidden civilizations, no distant signals, no ancient alien empires waiting beyond the stars. Just us. What would that mean? At first, it might feel disappointing. After all, we have spent generations imagining companions among the stars. Entire libraries have been written about them. Movies have shown us first contact. Writers have imagined countless versions of intelligent life. Some friendly, some frightening, some so advanced they appear almost divine. But what if none of them exist? What if the universe spent 14 billion years creating only one species capable of asking questions? There is a strange beauty in that possibility, because if humanity truly is alone, then every song ever written becomes infinitely more precious. Every painting, every act of kindness, every child looking through a telescope for the first time. If we are alone, then consciousness itself may be among the rarest phenomena in existence. And suddenly, our small world becomes something extraordinary, a tiny blue sanctuary in an ocean of darkness. Perhaps that is why this question has endured for so long. It is not really a question about extraterrestrials. It is a question about ourselves. Because hidden within, are we alone? Is another question entirely. What does it mean if we are? Tonight, we will travel together through that possibility. We will cross billions of years of cosmic history. We will stand beneath silent stars. We will imagine a universe without companions. And by the time our journey comes to an end, perhaps we will discover something unexpected. That even if humanity is alone in the cosmos, we may never have been lonely. After all, for billions of years, the universe existed in silence. And then, on one small world orbiting an ordinary star, it learned to ask questions. Perhaps that by itself is already an extraordinary answer. There is an old habit shared by nearly every human being. When we think about distance, we think in terms we can feel. A walk to a nearby store, a drive across a city, a flight across an ocean. Even the greatest journeys of our lives are measured in hours, or, at most, days. The universe, however, has never shown much interest in human scales. And perhaps that is why it continues to surprise us. If you were to ask someone living 1,000 years ago how large the world was, they might have pointed toward the horizon. For most of human history, the Earth itself felt infinite. Mountains separated kingdoms. Oceans appeared endless. Entire civilizations lived and vanished without ever knowing one another existed. Then, slowly, our world became smaller. Ships crossed seas. Maps filled with detail. Satellites eventually photographed our planet in its entirety. And for the first time, humanity saw its home, not as an endless landscape, but as a small sphere suspended in darkness. There is something profoundly humbling about that image. A tiny blue world. No borders, no labels, only clouds drifting above oceans that have existed for billions of years. And yet, astonishingly, the Earth is not large. In fact, on the scale of the cosmos, it is almost impossibly small. If the Earth were reduced to the size of a marble, the Moon would orbit a few inches away. The Sun, meanwhile, would be located several meters from both of them. And still, we would not even have left our immediate neighborhood. This is where the universe begins to behave strangely. Because our minds are remarkably poor at understanding very large numbers, we can imagine 10 people in a room, 100, perhaps even 1,000. But millions become abstract. Billions become almost meaningless. And the universe seems particularly fond of numbers beyond imagination. Light, for example, travels at approximately 1 billion kilometers per hour, fast enough to circle the Earth more than 7 times in a single second. And yet, even moving at such extraordinary speeds, sunlight still requires more than 8 minutes to reach us. The warmth you felt from the sun this morning began its journey while you were still asleep. There is something peaceful about that thought. That sunlight is always arriving from the past. And if the sun were to suddenly disappear, which, fortunately, it will not, we would continue living beneath its light for another 8 minutes before noticing anything had changed. But 8 minutes is nothing. Jupiter, the largest planet in our solar system, lies much farther away. Light takes roughly 40 minutes to reach it, and Pluto, the distant world that spent decades occupying a curious place in our hearts, exists nearly 5 hours away at the speed of light. 5 hours, and still, we have not truly left the solar system. The Voyager 1 spacecraft has been traveling since 1977. It carries a golden record containing music, greetings, and sounds from Earth. For nearly 50 years, it has moved relentlessly outward through the darkness. And despite all that time, it remains astonishingly close to home. By cosmic standards, if another civilization discovered Voyager tomorrow, they might reasonably conclude that humanity had only just stepped outside its front door. Because beyond our solar system lies another distance entirely. The nearest star to our sun is Proxima Centauri. Light, the fastest thing in the universe, requires more than 4 years to make the journey. Imagine traveling continuously for 4 years at the speed of light. No stops, no delays, and only then would you arrive at the next star. Human beings have existed for hundreds of thousands of years. Civilization itself is only a few thousand years old. Yet even our nearest stellar neighbor remains almost unimaginably distant. Sometimes, I wonder whether the universe designed distance as a form of humility, a quiet reminder that existence is larger than our ambitions. And then there is the Milky Way, our galaxy, home, a vast spiral containing hundreds of billions of stars. To cross it from one side to the other at the speed of light would require approximately 100,000 years. Think about that for a moment. Every empire in human history, every language ever spoken, every song, every war, every love story, every person who has ever lived, all of it occurred during a period of time shorter than a single journey across our galaxy. There are moments when the universe feels less like a place and more like an idea, something too immense to fully inhabit with thought. And still, the Milky Way is only one galaxy. Astronomers once believed it was the entire universe. Today, we know better. The observable universe contains not hundreds, not thousands, but trillions of galaxies, each with their own stars, their own planets, perhaps their own histories. There are galaxies so distant that the light reaching Earth tonight began its journey before our planet existed. Ancient light from a younger cosmos, messages sent long before humanity appeared to receive them. In a sense, astronomy is the study of memory. Every telescope is a machine designed to look backward through time. The farther we look, the older the universe becomes. And somewhere, hidden among all of this immensity, is us, one species, on one planet, orbiting one star, in one galaxy, among trillions. It is difficult to hear those words without feeling small, but I have never found smallness particularly frightening. There is freedom in it. The stars do not expect anything from us. Galaxies ask nothing in return. The universe simply allows us to exist within it for a little while, and perhaps that is enough. Still, this extraordinary scale creates a problem, because if the universe is truly this large, if there are trillions of galaxies and countless worlds, then the existence of intelligent life elsewhere begins to feel almost inevitable. How could it not? Surely, among so many stars, consciousness must have emerged again. Surely, somewhere beyond our sight, another civilization has looked upward and wondered whether they are alone. And yet, the larger the universe becomes, the stranger its silence feels, because every new galaxy we discover should increase the likelihood that someone else exists. Instead, it only seems to increase the size of the room in which we find ourselves standing. A room with no walls, no ceiling, and no obvious companions. There is a thought that often returns to me during quiet nights. If humanity truly is alone, then every telescope ever built has not been searching for others. It has been slowly revealing the size of our responsibility, because a universe this large should not be empty. And if it is, then perhaps consciousness is rarer than we ever dared imagine. Perhaps among all the stars scattered across the darkness, there is only one world where the universe learned to ask questions. Our world, for now, at least. And as we continue our journey together, the silence around us grows a little deeper, because next, we must confront something even more mysterious than the size of the cosmos itself. The fact that, despite all of it, the stars have never answered. For as long as humanity has been capable of listening, the universe has remained remarkably quiet. This is, perhaps, one of the strangest facts we have ever discovered. Because if the cosmos were truly empty, its silence would make sense. And if it were full of life, we might expect noise, signals, evidence, something. Instead, we find ourselves living in an uncomfortable middle ground. A universe that appears perfectly designed for a company, and yet one that behaves as though no one is home. There is a certain kind of silence that exists only at night. You have probably experienced it, the kind that arrives after everyone else has gone to sleep. No traffic, no voices, only the faint sounds of a familiar world settling into itself. At first, it feels peaceful. Then, if you remain awake long enough, it begins to feel strangely significant. The silence itself becomes noticeable. The universe possesses that same quality. For thousands of years, our ancestors assumed the stars were beyond our reach. They could not imagine sending messages into the heavens because the heavens themselves seemed inaccessible. But the 20th century changed everything. Suddenly, humanity could speak across oceans, then across continents, eventually across space itself. And almost immediately, we began trying to introduce ourselves. There is something deeply human about that. Presented with an infinite cosmos, our first instinct was to wave. Radio waves have been leaving Earth for more than a century now. Every broadcast, every song, every historic speech, every whispered transmission between distant points on our planet has continued outward at the speed of light. Somewhere, approximately 100 light-years from Earth, there is a growing sphere of human history expanding through the darkness. It contains jazz music, news reports, fragments of forgotten television shows, the voices of people who have long since passed away. If another civilization exists within that sphere and possesses the means to listen, they may already know we are here. I find that thought unexpectedly comforting. Imagine receiving a signal from another world and discovering that the first thing humanity chose to share with the universe was music. But the silence works both ways, because if we have been transmitting for a century, then surely others have had time to do the same. The Milky Way is ancient. Our sun is relatively young. Many stars formed billions of years before Earth existed. If intelligent life is common, some civilizations should possess an unimaginable head start. Not centuries, millions of years, perhaps longer. A civilization only 1,000 years more advanced than ours would appear extraordinary. A civilization 1 million years older might seem indistinguishable from nature itself. And yet, despite all this time, despite all these stars, we have found nothing definitive. No artificial signals, no alien probes, no unmistakable evidence that another intelligence has ever crossed the darkness between worlds. Only silence. there is a curious tension hidden within that silence. Because absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Astronomers know this well. The universe is vast, and our search has only just begun. In many ways, humanity has spent less time searching for extraterrestrial life than it spent building the pyramids. Cosmically speaking, we have only just opened our eyes. And yet, even acknowledging that, the silence remains difficult to ignore. The SETI Institute, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, has spent decades listening. Great radio telescopes have scanned the heavens, patiently searching for patterns that nature alone cannot explain. There have been moments of excitement, signals that briefly captured the world's attention. Perhaps the most famous arrived in 1977. It lasted only 72 seconds. A powerful radio signal, unlike anything previously observed. An astronomer named Jerry Emin was so surprised that he circled the data and wrote a single word beside it. Wow. Today we still call it the wow signal. It has never been conclusively explained, nor has it ever been detected again. There is something almost poetic about that. Humanity spent thousands of years asking whether anyone else was out there. And one day, the universe seemed to answer with a brief whisper, then returned to silence. Perhaps it was nothing, a natural phenomenon, an unfortunate coincidence, or perhaps it was exactly what it appeared to be. We simply do not know. The truth is that the universe rarely provides answers in convenient ways. More often, it offers mysteries. And perhaps that is why the silence feels so profound. Because it forces us to confront possibilities we would rather avoid. What if intelligent life is extraordinarily rare? What if civilizations tend not to survive very long? What if they lose interest in communicating? Or perhaps, and this is the thought that lingers longest in the quiet hours of the night, what if there is simply no one else to answer? Imagine a child standing on a beach beside an endless ocean, calling into the darkness and waiting for a reply. That, in many ways, is humanity. We have built telescopes instead of lighthouses, radio antennas instead of ships, but the feeling remains remarkably similar. We are calling into something unimaginably vast and hoping with all our hearts that someone calls back. And perhaps they will, tomorrow, 1,000 years from now, or not at all. There is another possibility that I find strangely beautiful. Perhaps the universe has always been silent, not because it lacks life, but because silence is its natural state. Stars do not speak, galaxies do not sing. Even black holes announce themselves only through their effects upon the things around them. The cosmos may simply be a place where intelligence emerges quietly, asks its questions, and disappears before ever hearing an answer. If that is true, then every civilization may spend its existence doing exactly what we are doing now, listening, waiting, wondering, and perhaps somewhere beneath another sky, another species is asking why the stars never answered. There is a certain companionship in that possibility, a shared loneliness stretching across the cosmos. But what if the silence means something else entirely? What if it is not an absence? What if it is a message, not one intentionally sent, but one written into the structure of reality itself? A message that says, consciousness is rare, Life is precious. You may be more important than you realize. Because if humanity truly is alone, then every moment of awareness becomes infinitely valuable. Every laugh, every memory, every dream, every person who has ever looked upward and asked whether someone else was looking back. Perhaps we have spent so much time fearing cosmic loneliness that we have overlooked its implication. If we are alone, then we are not insignificant. Quite the opposite. We may be carrying something extraordinarily uncommon through an otherwise silent universe. And that thought changes everything. Because suddenly, the question is no longer, why hasn't anyone answered? It becomes, what if we are the answer? For now, the stars remain silent. They have remained silent for all of human history, and perhaps they always will. But silence, as every listener eventually learns, is not the same thing as emptiness. Sometimes, silence is simply the space in which meaning waits to be discovered. And as our journey continues, we will encounter one of the most famous questions ever asked about that silence. A question posed by a physicist during lunch in 1950. A question so simple that it continues to haunt astronomy to this day. If the universe should be full of life, where is everybody? It is one of the shortest questions in all of science, and perhaps one of the most unsettling. Where is everybody? The story begins in the summer of 1950. Physicist Enrico Fermi was having lunch with colleagues at the Los Alamos National Laboratory when the conversation drifted, as conversations among physicists occasionally do, toward extraterrestrial life. By then, humanity had already begun to understand the true scale of the cosmos. We knew the Milky Way contained an astonishing number of stars. We knew many of those stars were older than our own sun. And we understood that, given enough time, intelligent life should have had countless opportunities to emerge elsewhere. Somewhere during that conversation, Fermi asked a question so direct that it immediately exposed a profound contradiction. If intelligent life should be common, where is everybody? That is the Fermi Paradox. It is not really a paradox in the traditional sense. It is more like a quiet disagreement between mathematics and experience. The mathematics tells us that the universe should be full of civilizations. Experience tells us that the universe appears silent. Both cannot be entirely correct. Or perhaps, somehow, they can. There is something wonderfully human about this problem. Presented with trillions of stars, humanity did what it always does. We counted, and the numbers seemed optimistic. Consider this for a moment. The Milky Way is more than 13 billion years old. Our sun formed approximately 4.5 billion years ago. That means there was an immense amount of time before Earth ever existed. If another civilization appeared, even 1 million years before us, a mere moment on cosmic timescales, it would possess an almost unimaginable advantage. To put this into perspective, 1 million years ago, our ancestors had not yet invented language as we know it. They had not built cities. They had not painted the walls of caves. Human civilization, all of recorded history, occupies only the thinnest layer. at the very end of our timeline. A million-year head start is difficult to comprehend. A civilization that old might have spread across its entire galaxy. It might have built structures around stars. It might have learned to preserve itself indefinitely. Or perhaps it would have become something we would no longer recognize as life at all. And yet, when we look outward, we see no obvious signs of such beings. No galactic empires, no stellar engineering, no enormous artificial structures blocking the light of distant suns. Only stars, continuing their patient work, exactly as they have for billions of years. This is what makes the Fermi Paradox so compelling, because it suggests that somewhere in our assumptions, something is wrong. Perhaps intelligent life is extraordinarily rare. Perhaps life itself is common, but intelligence is not. After all, life on Earth appeared relatively quickly, but intelligent life? That took billions of years. For most of our planet's history, Earth belonged not to civilizations, but to microbes. Tiny organisms drifting through ancient oceans beneath unfamiliar skies. If Earth's history were compressed into a single day, humanity would arrive only in the final seconds before midnight. And perhaps that is the lesson. Maybe consciousness is not the inevitable outcome of evolution. Maybe it is an accident, a beautiful one, but an accident nonetheless. There is another possibility. Perhaps civilizations tend not to last. This idea is often called the Great Filter. It suggests that somewhere between lifeless planets and galaxies-spanning civilizations lies an obstacle so difficult that almost no species survive it. The Great Filter could exist behind us. Perhaps the emergence of complex life is incredibly rare, and humanity has already passed the most difficult test. That would be encouraging, but it could also lie ahead of us. Perhaps every civilization eventually reaches a point from which it cannot recover. War, environmental collapse, artificial intelligence, resource exhaustion, or dangers we have not yet imagined. The unsettling truth is that we do not know, and that uncertainty gives the Fermi Paradox much of its emotional weight. Because hidden within the question, where is everybody, is another, more personal question. What happened to them? Imagine standing in an ancient city long abandoned. The buildings remain, the roads still exist, but the people are gone. You cannot help but wonder about their stories, what they loved, what they feared, how they disappeared. The universe often feels like that, as though we arrived late to a gathering that ended long ago, or perhaps very early, before anyone else has had a chance to arrive. This leads to one of the most beautiful possibilities of all. What if humanity is among the first? The universe is old, certainly, but perhaps intelligent life requires such a precise combination of circumstances that civilizations emerge only occasionally. If that is true, then the stars are not silent because everyone is gone. They are silent because they are still waiting. Waiting for minds to awaken. Waiting for questions to be asked. Waiting for someone to notice them. There is something profoundly hopeful about that idea. Imagine a future in which humanity survives. Thousands of years become millions. Millions become billions. One day, perhaps, our descendants may travel between stars, not as explorers searching for ancient civilizations, but as the first civilization bringing consciousness to an otherwise quiet galaxy. Perhaps one day, another species will look toward Earth and ask, who were the ones that came before us? Of course, there are other explanations. Some scientists have suggested that advanced civilizations deliberately remain hidden. Others propose that intelligent species quickly transition into forms that are difficult to detect. Perhaps they live within vast simulations. Perhaps they communicate in ways we have not yet imagined. Or perhaps they have learned something that we have not, that the universe is less about expansion and more about understanding. But regardless of the explanation, the Fermi Paradox remains, a simple question that grows heavier the longer we sit with it. Where is everybody? It is a question without an answer, at least for now. And perhaps that is appropriate. After all, humanity has spent its entire existence living between mysteries. We do not know how consciousness emerges. We do not know what existed before the Big Bang, and we do not know whether the stars are empty or merely quiet. Maybe uncertainty has always been our natural home. There is one final thought I would like to leave you with before we continue. Imagine that tomorrow we finally receive an unmistakable signal, a message from another world. How would you feel? Relieved? Excited? Afraid? Now imagine the opposite. Imagine discovering, beyond any reasonable doubt, that humanity truly is alone. That among all the stars, all the galaxies, and all the billions of years of cosmic history, there is only us. Which possibility feels heavier? I have never been entirely sure, because one fills the universe with strangers, and the other places all of existence's awareness into our hands. The Fermi Paradox does not tell us which answer is correct. It merely reminds us that both are extraordinary. And as we continue our journey together, we will turn from silence to probability. Because if we are going to ask whether humanity is alone, we must first ask another question. What are the chances that life ever appears at all? There are some questions so large that they seem to resist mathematics. How do you measure love? How do you measure beauty? And perhaps most difficult of all, how do you measure the likelihood that we are alone? In 1961, an astronomer named Frank Drake attempted something extraordinary. He decided to count the uncountable, not because he believed mathematics could solve the mystery of extraterrestrial life, but because he hoped it might help us ask better questions. The result became known as the Drake equation. At first glance, it appears surprisingly simple. It does not claim to tell us exactly how many civilizations exist in the galaxy. Instead, it asks us to consider all the steps required for intelligent life to emerge. How many stars are born each year? How many possess planets? How many of those planets could support life? How often does life actually appear? How often does intelligence emerge? And perhaps, most importantly, how long do civilizations survive? It is less an equation and more a conversation written in mathematics, because every variable hides another mystery. Take stars, for example. When Frank Drake first proposed his equation, humanity did not even know whether other stars possessed planets. It seemed entirely possible that our solar system was unusual. Today, however, we know something remarkable. Planets appear to be everywhere. Astronomers have discovered thousands of them. Some are worlds covered entirely in ice. Others orbit two suns. Some are larger than Jupiter, while others seem strangely similar to Earth. There are planets where it rains molten glass. Planets so hot that metal becomes vapor. And perhaps, somewhere among them, planets with oceans, clouds, and quiet evenings not unlike our own. The universe, it seems, is very good at making worlds. That realization alone changed humanity's relationship with the cosmos. For thousands of years, we wondered whether planets existed elsewhere. Now, we know that stars and planets go together almost as naturally as rain and rivers. Suddenly, the galaxy feels more populated. And yet, the equation becomes more difficult from there. Because having a planet is not the same as having life. Earth formed approximately 4.5 billion years ago. Life appeared relatively early in its history. In geological terms, almost immediately. This has led some scientists to suggest that life itself may not be especially rare. Given the right conditions, perhaps chemistry naturally becomes biology. Perhaps the universe has been quietly teaching atoms how to arrange themselves into living things for billions of years. I find that thought comforting, that life may not be an exception, but a tendency, a habit of the cosmos. But then we encounter another complication. For most of Earth's existence, life remained simple. Single-celled organisms dominated our world for billions of years. Complex life arrived much later. An intelligent life? That appears to be rarer still. Dinosaurs ruled the Earth for more than 160 million years. Yet, none built telescopes. None asked questions about distant galaxies. Intelligence, at least in the form we recognize, may require an astonishing sequence of unlikely events. A stable star, a suitable planet, liquid water, time, the right chemistry. Mass extinctions survived rather than suffered. And eventually, somewhere along the way, consciousness. It is difficult not to feel a certain gratitude when considering how many things had to go right for us to exist. Had a single asteroid missed the Earth 66 million years ago, this story might be very different. Perhaps mammals would never have flourished. Perhaps humanity would never have emerged. The universe is filled with these delicate moments, tiny changes, producing entirely different histories. There is another variable in the Drake equation that fascinates me more than any other: the lifespan of civilizations, because it asks a profoundly human question. Once intelligence appears, how long does it last? We do not know the answer. Our own technological civilization has existed for only a brief moment. Radio transmissions have been leaving Earth for just over a century. By galactic standards, humanity is still an infant, an intelligent species only recently aware of its surroundings. Imagine visiting a forest and encountering a seedling that immediately begins asking whether ancient trees exist elsewhere. That is us, curious, hopeful, and very, very young. Some scientists believe civilizations may survive for millions of years. Others suspect they rarely endure beyond a few centuries. The truth, once again, remains hidden among the stars. And this uncertainty changes everything, because the galaxy may not be empty. It may simply be that civilizations rise and fall like waves upon an ocean. One appears, another disappears, and the chances of two existing at the same moment become smaller than we would like to imagine. There is a melancholy hidden within that idea. Entire histories unfolding beneath distant suns. Entire species learning to wonder, only to vanish before anyone else notices they were ever there. Perhaps, somewhere in the Milky Way, there once existed a civilization that wrote poetry beneath unfamiliar constellations. Perhaps they built observatories. Perhaps they asked whether they were alone. And perhaps they disappeared millions of years before the first human ever looked toward the sky. The universe would remember them only through the light of their star. And even that, eventually, would fade. The Drake equation does not solve these mysteries. It simply gives them shape. Depending on the values we choose, the galaxy may contain thousands of civilizations, or one, us. That is what makes this question so enduring, because the mathematics refuses to commit itself. It allows hope, but it also permits solitude. There are evenings when I find myself returning to the same thought. If humanity is alone, then the Drake equation is not a story about countless civilizations scattered across the stars. It is a story about improbability, about the extraordinary sequence of events that transformed a lifeless universe into one capable of asking questions. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps meaning does not require abundance. A single candle still produces light. A single voice can still break a silence. A single world can still carry the awareness of an entire cosmos. Frank Drake passed away in 2022. He spent much of his life listening for signals from distant civilizations. I sometimes wonder whether he believed humanity would ever receive an answer. Perhaps. Or perhaps he understood something deeper, that the search itself has value. Because every telescope we build, every equation we write, and every question we ask reveals something important, not only about the universe, but about ourselves. After all, there is something profoundly beautiful about a species that refuses to stop listening. And as our journey continues, we will begin to consider a possibility that grows increasingly difficult to ignore. What if life is not common? What if Earth is not merely unusual? What if, among all the stars, our small blue world is one of the rarest places the universe has ever created? There is a photograph that has quietly followed humanity for more than half a century. You have probably seen it before. A small blue sphere suspended in an endless sea of black, no larger than a marble held at arm's length. No borders, no labels, no indication that it contains every person who has ever lived. And yet, it does. Every king, every scientist, every artist, every child who ever laughed beneath a summer sky. All of them lived their entire lives on that small, fragile world. There are moments when I think we have become too familiar with the Earth. We wake each morning expecting gravity to hold us, expecting the atmosphere to protect us, expecting the sun to rise precisely when it should. Our planet is so dependable that we rarely stop to consider how extraordinary it truly is. Mars taught us this lesson. So did Venus. The more worlds we discover, the more unusual our own begins to appear. Consider Venus for a moment. From a distance, it is often called Earth's twin. It is similar in size, similar in composition, and yet, standing upon its surface would be impossible. Its atmosphere is thick with carbon dioxide. Its temperatures are hot enough to melt lead. The pressure at ground level is so immense that a human being would not survive for more than a few moments. And Mars, meanwhile, offers the opposite problem. Too cold, too dry. Its atmosphere is so thin that breathing would be impossible without assistance. It is remarkable, isn't it? Our nearest planetary neighbors, worlds that have shared the solar system with us for billions of years, are profoundly hostile to life as we know it. And then there is Earth. Not too hot, not too cold. A stable star. Liquid water covering most of its surface. An atmosphere that filters harmful radiation while allowing sunlight to reach the ground. A magnetic field quietly deflecting charged particles from space. Even our moon may have played a crucial role, stabilizing Earth's tilt and helping maintain a relatively predictable climate over immense stretches of time. It begins to feel less like coincidence and more like choreography. Not in a mystical sense, but in the sense that an extraordinary number of conditions had to align simultaneously. Scientists sometimes refer to this idea as the rare Earth hypothesis. It suggests that while simple life may exist throughout the universe, complex life could be extraordinarily uncommon. Perhaps microbial organisms are scattered across countless worlds. But civilizations, telescopes, consciousness capable of contemplating its own existence, those may be another matter entirely. It is an unsettling possibility, because it means that when we look at Earth, we may not be looking at something ordinary. We may be looking at one of the rarest places in the cosmos. Think of all the things that had to happen. The right star, the right distance, the right chemistry. Billions of years without complete catastrophe. Mass extinctions, severe enough to encourage change, but not so severe that they ended the story entirely. There is a beautiful fragility hidden within that timeline. Earth's history is not a straight line. It is a series of improbable survivals. Had an asteroid arrived a few moments earlier or later on cosmic timescales, mammals might never have flourished. Had our atmosphere developed differently, the oceans may never have formed. Had our magnetic field weakened permanently billions of years ago, the solar wind might have stripped our planet of its protection. And yet, somehow, here we are. Sometimes, I imagine the universe as an immense library. Every star is a book. Every planet, a page. Most pages are empty. Some contain simple stories, and a very small number may contain something extraordinary. A world where matter learned to live. A world where life learned to think. A world where thinking beings began asking whether they were alone. Perhaps Earth is one of those pages. Perhaps it is the only one. There is another thought that lingers with me. Humanity often speaks of finding a second home. Mars, distant exoplanets, future colonies among the stars. And I understand the appeal. There is something deeply human about wanting a backup plan. But what if there is no backup? What if planets like Earth are separated not by light years, but by entire galaxies. What if our world represents a statistical miracle, repeated only rarely throughout the history of the universe? If that is true, then every forest becomes more precious, every ocean, every quiet sunrise. Because they are no longer merely features of our environment, they are expressions of an incredibly uncommon phenomenon: life. There is a tendency among intelligent beings, assuming there are others, to take home for granted. After all, home is where you begin. It feels normal precisely because you have never known anything else. Fish do not spend much time contemplating water, and perhaps humanity has spent too little time contemplating Earth. Astronauts often describe a phenomenon known as the overview effect. Seeing our planet from space changes them. Borders disappear. Differences seem smaller. Earth transforms from a collection of nations into a single, luminous world drifting through the darkness. Many return with the same realization: home is more fragile than we imagined, and perhaps more beautiful. If humanity is truly alone, then Earth becomes something even greater. Not merely our home, but the home of consciousness itself. The place where the universe became capable of remembering. The place where atoms organize themselves into stories. There is an almost unbearable beauty in that idea. That, among trillions of galaxies, one small planet produced Beethoven's symphonies, children's laughter, libraries, and telescopes pointed toward the stars. It is enough to make even an ordinary evening feel extraordinary. Because somewhere beyond the clouds tonight, the cosmos continues expanding exactly as it always has. Galaxies continue drifting apart. Stars continue being born. And on one tiny world, someone is lying awake, wondering whether any of it matters. I think it does. I think it matters immensely. Because if Earth is incredibly rare, then our responsibility extends far beyond ourselves. We are not merely preserving a planet. We may be preserving one of the universe's few opportunities to know itself. And that possibility carries a certain weight, a quiet, beautiful weight. As we continue our journey, however, another question awaits us, one that is both hopeful and unsettling. Because if Earth is rare, and if the universe is still young in ways we do not fully appreciate, then perhaps humanity is not late to the cosmos. Perhaps we are early. Perhaps, against all odds, we are among the first. There is a tendency, when thinking about the universe, to imagine ourselves arriving late. After all, the cosmos is ancient. The universe is nearly 14 billion years old. Our sun formed only 4.5 billion years ago. Human civilization occupies such a small fraction of that history that it often feels as though we have entered a theater moments before the final act. Surely, we tell ourselves, others must have come before us. Surely, countless civilizations have risen and fallen beneath distant stars while Earth was still young. And perhaps they have. But there is another possibility. One that receives less attention, perhaps because it feels so unexpected. What if we are among the first? It is an idea that initially sounds absurd. How could humanity, a species that only learned to fly a little more than a century ago, be early to anything in a universe this old? But the more astronomers study the cosmos, the more complicated that question becomes. Because while the universe itself is ancient, many of the ingredients necessary for life are not. The first stars were very different from those we see today. They contained almost nothing except hydrogen and helium. The heavier elements, the carbon in your body, the oxygen you breathe, the iron in your blood, did not yet exist. They had to be created, forged inside stars, scattered across space by supernovae, recycled into new generations of worlds. In a very real sense, the universe spent billions of years preparing itself for life. The cosmos had to learn chemistry before chemistry could learn biology. And biology, in turn, needed time to learn consciousness. There is something strangely comforting about that. It suggests that existence is not merely a sequence of random events, but a long, unfolding process. A story still being written. Imagine arriving at a vast garden shortly after the first flowers have begun to bloom. The garden itself may be old. Its soil may have existed for ages, but the blossoms are new. Perhaps civilizations are like that. Perhaps intelligence is not something that appeared billions of years ago and spread across the stars. Perhaps it is only now beginning to emerge. There are scientists who have suggested exactly this. Some estimates indicate that many Earth-like planets may not reach their most stable periods until far in the future. Our own galaxy could remain hospitable to life for trillions of years. Trillions. Compared to that, humanity's entire history becomes almost imperceptible. If the Milky Way's lifespan were represented as a single year, our civilization would occupy less than the briefest instant before midnight on January 1st. Perhaps we have been assuming that we arrived at the end of the story when, in reality, we are reading the opening chapter. That possibility changes the emotional weight of everything. Because if we are among the first civilizations to emerge, then the silence of the stars suddenly makes sense. The universe is not empty. It is simply waking up. Somewhere, perhaps at this very moment, simple life may be stirring beneath alien oceans. On distant worlds, evolution may be taking its first uncertain steps toward intelligence. There may be planets where creatures are only now looking upward for the first time, wondering what those distant lights might be. And millions of years from now, they may ask the same question we ask tonight. Are we alone? I find that thought unexpectedly beautiful, not because it answers our questions, but because it transforms them. Instead of being the last guests at an ancient gathering, humanity becomes one of the first arrivals, not inheritors of a quiet universe, pioneers within it. There is a certain responsibility hidden within that idea. If we are early, then our actions matter in ways we have scarcely considered. Every library we preserve, every scientific discovery, every effort to ensure that humanity survives, all of it becomes part of a much larger story. Because if consciousness is only beginning to spread throughout the cosmos, then the future may belong not to ancient civilizations beyond our reach, but to civilizations that have not yet been born. Perhaps, billions of years from now, the galaxy will be full of life. Perhaps the stars will one day host countless minds, sharing stories across unimaginable distances. And perhaps, somewhere in that distant future, someone will remember that humanity was among the first to ask the questions. There is an old saying that planting a tree is an act of faith. You may never sit beneath its shade, and yet you plant it anyway. Perhaps civilization itself is something similar. Everything we build may ultimately belong to beings who do not yet exist, our descendants, or perhaps strangers beneath distant suns. There is another thought that occasionally visits me during quiet nights. What if humanity survives? Not for centuries, not for millennia, but for millions of years. What would we become? Would we still recognize ourselves? Would we still tell stories? Would we still look toward the stars with the same sense of wonder? Or would we eventually become the very thing we have spent our lives searching for? It is an extraordinary possibility that somewhere in the distant future, another young civilization may scan the heavens and find evidence of a species so ancient and advanced that it feels almost mythical, and without realizing it, they would be looking at us. Perhaps that is the ultimate irony hidden within our search for extraterrestrial life. We spend so much time imagining alien civilizations that we rarely consider the possibility that humanity itself may one day become one. Not in appearance, perhaps, but in age, in wisdom, in distance from its origins. After all, every ancient civilization was once young. Every towering tree was once a seed. And every future history begins with a single moment. This one, tonight. There is something deeply hopeful about the idea that we are early. It transforms the universe from a place of abandonment into a place of potential. The silence of the stars no longer feels like an absence. It feels like anticipation, as though the cosmos is waiting patiently for consciousness to spread among its countless worlds. And if that is true, then perhaps humanity's role is not merely to survive. Perhaps our role is to begin, to carry the first light into the darkness, to ask the first questions, to become the first chapter in a story that will continue long after our sun has faded from the sky. Of course, there remains another possibility, one far more difficult to accept, because if we are not the first, then perhaps we are something else entirely. Perhaps we are the last, and that, dear traveler, is a thought best approached slowly. For the universe has a way of making even its saddest possibilities feel strangely beautiful beneath the stars. There is a particular kind of sadness that belongs only to old places. You can feel it while walking through the ruins of an ancient city. The people are gone. Their voices have long since faded into history. And yet, evidence of their existence remains. A staircase worn smooth by countless footsteps, a wall that once sheltered laughter, a name carved into stone by someone who never imagined it would outlive them. Standing in such places, it is difficult not to ask the same question. What happened? The universe invites us to ask that question on a much larger scale. Until now, we have considered the possibility that humanity is early, that perhaps the stars remain silent because consciousness has only just begun to emerge. But there is another possibility, one that feels considerably heavier. What if we are not among the first? What if we are among the last? It is not an idea that most people enjoy contemplating. And perhaps that is understandable. There is comfort in imagining a universe filled with civilizations waiting to be discovered. There is even comfort in imagining that we are the pioneers. But the thought of being the final witnesses to a once living cosmos carries a different emotional weight. Imagine arriving in a vast library. Its shelves stretch beyond sight. Every book tells the story of a civilization, and as you walk through the aisles, you begin to realize something unsettling. The books are ancient. Dust covers their covers. No new volumes have appeared for a very long time. Eventually, you arrive at the final shelf. There, waiting quietly, is a single, unfinished book. Ours. There is something haunting about that image, and yet, science allows for the possibility. The universe is old, very old, old enough for countless stories to have unfolded before Earth even formed. If civilizations tend to destroy themselves, or if intelligence naturally proves temporary, then perhaps the silence we observe is not the silence of an empty cosmos. Perhaps it is the silence that remains after the music has stopped. This idea occasionally appears in discussions of the Great Filter, not as a scientific conclusion, but as a possibility that somewhere in the history of the universe, countless civilizations rose beneath distant stars. They built, they discovered, they asked the same questions we ask tonight. And eventually, one by one, they disappeared. The reasons could be endless. Some may have exhausted their worlds. Others may have succumbed to technologies they did not fully understand. Some may have chosen to become something else entirely. And some may simply have reached the natural end of their stories. There is a tendency among human beings to imagine civilizations as permanent things. But history suggests otherwise. Empires rise, empires fall, languages appear and vanish. Entire cultures survive only as fragments, preserved in museums and memory. Perhaps intelligence itself follows a similar pattern. Temporary, brilliant, and fragile. The stars, after all, are patient. They do not mourn our passing. They do not celebrate our arrival. They simply continue burning. There is a thought experiment that astronomers occasionally entertain. Imagine a civilization that emerged 100 million years before humanity. What traces would remain? Not much. Mountains would rise and erode. Continents would shift. Even great monuments would eventually disappear beneath the patient work of time. The universe is remarkably good at forgetting. Perhaps that is why the silence feels so complete. Not because no one was ever here, but because time is very thorough. If humanity vanished tomorrow, the Earth would slowly reclaim our cities. Within centuries, forests would begin growing through streets. Within millennia, many of our greatest structures would crumble. And given enough time, it would become difficult to prove we ever existed at all. The cosmos may be filled with the ghosts of forgotten civilizations. Not literal ghosts, of course, but histories erased so completely that no evidence remains. Entire species remembered only by the stars that once illuminated their worlds. I sometimes wonder what they were like. Did they laugh? Did they tell stories to their children? Did they look upward and feel the same mixture of curiosity and uncertainty that we feel tonight. Perhaps one civilization discovered the nature of consciousness. Another may have mastered the stars, and another may have spent its existence creating works of art beyond our imagination. If they existed, they are gone now, and somehow that makes our own existence feel both smaller and more precious. Because if we are the last, then humanity carries an extraordinary responsibility. We become more than a civilization. We become memory itself, the final witnesses to a universe that once knew many voices. There is a melancholy beauty in that thought. Imagine standing at the edge of a great forest just before winter. The birds have departed, the leaves have fallen, and for a brief moment, everything is still. You know that life once filled this place. You can feel it, but all that remains is silence. Perhaps the universe feels that way because it has simply had more winters than we can imagine. Of course, we do not know if any of this is true, and perhaps that uncertainty is a gift because it allows us to continue hoping, to continue searching, to continue believing that somewhere beyond the reach of our telescopes, another light still burns. But if humanity truly is among the last civilizations the cosmos will ever know, then our existence becomes something almost impossibly meaningful. Every library becomes sacred. Every piece of music, every memory, every quiet conversation shared beneath the stars, because they are no longer merely human experiences. They become part of the universe's final chapter. There is one thought that stays with me more than any other. If we are the last, then there may come a day when the final conscious being looks upward for the final time. The last question will be asked. The last story will be told. And then, after billions of years of awareness, the universe will return to silence once more. That thought should feel tragic, and perhaps it does. But there is another way of looking at it. For billions of years, the cosmos existed without consciousness. Then, for a brief and beautiful moment, it learned to wonder. Perhaps that moment, no matter how short, was always enough. And if we are the last, then maybe our responsibility is not to fear the silence. Maybe it is simply to ensure that, for as long as we are here, the universe continues to have something worth remembering. Because whether we are the first, the last, or somewhere in between, one truth remains. The stars are still shining tonight, and for now, there is still someone here to see them. In our next chapter, we will ask a question that feels almost impossible to answer. If humanity disappeared tomorrow, would the universe even notice? There is a quiet thought that occasionally visits us during sleepless nights. Not a frightening thought exactly, just a difficult one. If humanity disappeared tomorrow, what would happen? Not to our cities, not to our monuments, but to the universe itself. Would anything change? It is a question that feels almost too large to hold in the mind. After all, we occupy such a small corner of existence. Our planet circles an ordinary star near the edge of an ordinary galaxy. That galaxy is only one among hundreds of billions. And beyond those galaxies lie distances so immense that language begins to lose its usefulness. From the perspective of the cosmos, humanity seems impossibly small, and yet, here we are. Thinking about it, which, perhaps, is the remarkable part. Imagine for a moment that tomorrow arrives without us. The sun would still rise over the oceans. Winds would continue crossing mountain ranges. Rain would fall upon forests that no longer have names. The moon would continue its patient journey around the earth, exactly as it has for billions of years. Nothing in the heavens would pause. No star would burn differently. No galaxy would alter its course. The universe, at least at first glance, would appear entirely unchanged. There is a certain humility in that realization. Human beings often place themselves at the center of stories, and understandably so. Every life is experienced from the inside. To each of us, our existence feels immense because it is the only existence we will ever truly know. But the cosmos does not organize itself around our concerns. It never has. Long before humanity appeared, stars lived and died in magnificent silence. Long after we are gone, they will continue doing the same. The universe is under no obligation to remember us, and somehow I find that comforting. There is freedom in understanding that existence does not require an audience. A flower blooming in a distant valley remains beautiful, even if no one is there to see it. A star forming within a distant nebula remains extraordinary, even if its light never reaches another conscious mind. The universe does not perform for us. It simply is. And yet, there is another side to this question. Because while the universe may not notice our absence, something else certainly would. Earth. Within days, lights would begin disappearing across the planet. Cities would grow dark. Airports would fall silent. The constant hum of civilization, a sound so familiar that we rarely notice it, would finally cease. Within weeks, nature would begin its slow return. Plants would push through cracks in concrete. Animals would wander into places once reserved for people. The boundaries we spent thousands of years constructing would quietly dissolve. It would not happen dramatically. There would be no grand finale, only time continuing its work. Within centuries, many of our greatest cities would be difficult to recognize. Within millennia, most traces of our existence would have faded, and given enough time, even the Earth itself would forget us. Continents shift, mountains erode. The planet is patient. There is an almost poetic quality to that. Humanity has spent its entire history trying to leave a mark. We build monuments, we write books, we preserve memories. And perhaps that is not because we expect to live forever. Perhaps it is because, deep down, we understand that we will not. There is an old idea in astronomy that has always stayed with me. The atoms in your body were forged inside ancient stars. Before you were born, parts of you traveled through space for billions of years. One day, they will continue their journey without you. In that sense, perhaps nothing is ever truly lost, only rearranged. The carbon that forms your hands may one day become part of a tree, or an ocean, or another living creature beneath a future sky. The universe has always been very good at recycling itself. But consciousness, that is more difficult. Because if humanity is alone, then our disappearance would mean more than the loss of a species. It would mean the loss of witnesses. Think about that for a moment. Without conscious beings, who observes the stars? Who writes poetry about the moon? Who asks questions about infinity? The Andromeda galaxy would still drift toward the Milky Way. Supernovae would still illuminate distant regions of space. Black holes would continue their silent work, but there would be no one left to wonder about them. Carl Sagan once said that we are a way for the cosmos to know itself. I have always loved that idea, because it suggests that consciousness is not separate from the universe. It is something the universe does. A star burns. A planet forms. Life emerges. And eventually, after billions of years, the cosmos opens its eyes. If humanity disappeared tomorrow, perhaps the universe would not notice. But perhaps it would lose one of the few ways it has of experiencing its own existence. That feels important, not because it places us above the stars, but because it places us among them. There is another thought I often return to. Imagine a library containing every story ever written. Now imagine that library burning down. The universe itself would continue, but something irreplaceable would be gone. Every laugh, every memory, every moment of kindness shared between strangers. Entire worlds exist within human minds. And if humanity vanished, those worlds would vanish too. The first time someone held another person's hand. The last words spoken by ancient civilizations. The dreams of children who looked toward the night sky and imagined impossible things. All of it would disappear into silence. Perhaps that is why we preserve things. Not because we believe they will last forever, but because we understand how precious, temporary things can be. There is a Japanese concept known as mono no aware. It describes the gentle sadness that accompanies impermanence. The awareness that something is beautiful precisely because it cannot last. Cherry blossoms fall. Summer becomes autumn. Lives begin and end. And somehow, their temporary nature makes them more meaningful, not less. Perhaps humanity is like that. A brief flowering of consciousness in an ancient universe. Not permanent, not central, but beautiful nonetheless. So, would the universe notice if we disappeared? Probably not. The stars would continue shining. Galaxies would continue turning. Time would continue moving forward with its usual indifference. But there would be one less voice asking questions. One less species capable of wonder. And if we truly are alone, then the silence left behind would be deeper than we can possibly imagine. Still, tonight, that silence has not yet arrived. There are still lights in distant windows, still telescopes pointed toward the heavens, still people lying awake, wondering what their existence means. And perhaps, for now, that is enough. Because in our next chapter, we will consider something that naturally follows from this thought. If humanity may be the only conscious voice in the cosmos, what responsibility comes with that? There are responsibilities we choose, and then there are responsibilities that simply arrive, quietly, without asking for our permission. No child chooses the century in which they are born. No generation chooses the world it inherits. And humanity, if it is truly alone, did not choose that either. It would simply be the role we were given. There is something curious about the way human beings think about importance. We often associate it with size. Large mountains feel important. Large nations, large numbers. The universe, by comparison, is almost unimaginably large. And we are not. We are small, fragile, temporary. Yet importance and size have never been the same thing. A single sentence can change a life. A single decision can alter history. And perhaps a single civilization can matter more than its size would suggest. If humanity is alone, then consciousness may be one of the rarest things the universe has ever produced. Think about that for a moment. For nearly 14 billion years, stars have lived and died across the cosmos. Galaxies have collided. Black holes have formed. Entire worlds have emerged and vanished. And amid all of that, there is only one place we know of where matter has learned to ask questions. Here, that realization carries a certain weight, not an oppressive weight, a quiet one, like being entrusted with something precious. Imagine discovering that you are the caretaker of the last library on Earth. Inside are every poem, every scientific discovery, every piece of music ever created. You did not ask for this responsibility. And yet, there it is, waiting patiently in your hands. Perhaps humanity occupies a similar position, because if we are alone, then every act of preservation becomes more meaningful. Every child taught to read, every telescope built, every species protected from extinction, every effort to understand the world around us. These things cease to be merely human concerns. They become cosmic ones. There is a tendency to imagine that meaning must come from somewhere outside ourselves. That, if extraterrestrials exist, they might tell us who we are, or why we are here, or what purpose we serve. But perhaps meaning has always worked in the opposite direction. Perhaps it is not something we discover. Perhaps it is something we create. After all, the stars have never spoken. The galaxies have never offered instructions. The universe, for all its beauty, remains remarkably silent on the subject of purpose. And so humanity does what it has always done. It writes its own. There is something deeply admirable about that. That, despite our uncertainties, we continue building, continue loving, continue imagining futures we may never live to see. Civilization, in many ways, is an act of optimism. Every school assumes there will be another generation. Every tree planted assumes someone will one day rest beneath its shade. Every spacecraft launched toward the stars carries an unspoken message. We believe there will be a tomorrow. Perhaps that is our greatest strength. Not intelligence, not technology, but hope. Hope is a curious thing. It survives wars. It survives disasters. It survives even the knowledge of our own mortality. Human beings continue making plans despite understanding, perhaps better than any other species, that nothing lasts forever. And maybe that is why consciousness matters, because awareness allows us to choose what kind of story we wish to become. If we are alone, then one day humanity may spread beyond Earth. We may build cities beneath alien skies. We may carry music to other worlds. We may become the means by which consciousness expands throughout the galaxy. And if that happens, then every future civilization may trace its history back to this moment, to this fragile species that once looked upward from a small blue planet and wondered whether it had company. There is a beautiful symmetry in that the answer to our loneliness may not be finding another civilization. It may be becoming the civilization that ensures the universe is never lonely again. I sometimes think about future historians, not those who will live centuries from now, but those who may live millions of years from now. What will they say about us? Will they remember humanity as the species that preserved consciousness? The species that carried life beyond its birthplace? Or will we become another unfinished story, lost to time, like so many before us? The truth, as always, remains unwritten, and perhaps that is why this responsibility matters. Because the future is not something that happens to us. It is something we leave behind. There is an old proverb that says, "A society grows great when old people plant trees whose shade they know they will never sit beneath." Human civilization has always done this. The people who built the first observatories never saw the galaxies we have photographed. The scientists who imagined flight never witnessed humanity walking on the moon. And yet, they continued their work. They trusted us with their future. Now, perhaps, it is our turn to trust someone else with ours. There is another possibility, of course. Perhaps we are not alone. Perhaps tomorrow, or 1,000 years from now, we will finally hear another voice among the stars. I hope we do. But until that day arrives, we must live as though we are the only witnesses the universe has. Not because it is certainly true, but because it changes the way we treat what we have. It teaches gratitude, humility, responsibility, and perhaps that is not such a terrible thing. Because whether humanity is one civilization among countless others, or the sole bearer of consciousness in an ancient cosmos, our task remains remarkably similar: to care for one another, to preserve what is beautiful, to continue asking questions, and to leave the universe a little more aware than we found it. There is comfort in that thought, the kind of comfort that arrives quietly, like starlight crossing unimaginable distances, simply to reach your eyes. And as our journey nears its end, only one question remains. If humanity's story continues for thousands or even millions of years, what will consciousness eventually become? There is a question that humanity has carried with it for as long as it has possessed language. Not where are we, nor are we alone, but something even more intimate. What are we becoming? It is a question hidden within every generation. The first people to leave Africa could not have imagined cities. The builders of the ancient pyramids could not have imagined satellites, and the scientists who first learned that the Earth orbits the Sun could not have imagined that one day human beings would place telescopes beyond the atmosphere itself. History has a habit of surprising us, and perhaps nowhere is that more true than when we consider the future of consciousness. Because if humanity survives, if we endure the centuries ahead, then our descendants may be as different from us as we are from our distant ancestors. That thought can feel unsettling at first. After all, we tend to imagine the future as a more advanced version of the present. Faster computers, longer lives, more distant journeys. But evolution, whether biological or technological, rarely moves in straight lines. It transforms, and transformation is not always comfortable to witness. Imagine meeting a human being from 1,000 years in the future. Would you recognize them? Perhaps. Or perhaps not. They may still laugh, still tell stories, still look toward the stars with curiosity, but they may also possess abilities that feel almost impossible to us. They may remember every moment of their lives with perfect clarity. They may communicate without words. They may experience reality through senses we have not yet imagined. And perhaps, one day, they may no longer fear death in the way we do. There is something extraordinary about that possibility, because throughout history, every generation has quietly expanded the boundaries of what it means to be human. We learn to preserve memories in books, then in photographs, then in digital archives. Step by step, we have been moving pieces of ourselves outside our bodies. Our knowledge lives in libraries. Our voices survive in recordings. Our thoughts travel instantly across the world. In some ways, humanity has already begun extending consciousness beyond biology. And perhaps this process is only beginning. There are scientists and philosophers who have considered the possibility that one day consciousness itself may become transferable. Not merely information, but awareness. The feeling of being you. Could a human mind one day exist within a machine? Could memories be preserved indefinitely? Could consciousness survive the limitations of flesh? We do not know. And perhaps we are still centuries away from asking those questions seriously. But they remain among the most fascinating possibilities our future holds. Of course, such ideas introduce difficult questions. If you create a perfect copy of your mind, is it truly you, or is it merely someone who believes they are you? If consciousness can be duplicated, which version continues your story? These are not scientific questions alone. They are philosophical ones. Questions that may one day force humanity to redefine concepts we currently take for granted. Life, identity, mortality. There is a strange irony hidden here. For thousands of years, human beings dreamed of immortality. And now, as technology advances, we are beginning to wonder whether immortality would even feel like being human at all. Perhaps our limitations are not flaws. Perhaps they are part of the experience. After all, would a sunset feel as precious if we believed we would witness an infinite number of them? Would we value time if we possessed all of it? There is wisdom hidden within impermanence, and yet, curiosity continues pulling us forward. It always has. I sometimes imagine a future in which humanity spreads throughout the stars, not as a single civilization, but as countless branches of the same ancient tree. Some descendants may remain biological. Others may become partially synthetic. And still others may abandon physical forms entirely. Millions of years from now, the galaxy may be populated by beings who all trace their origins back to Earth, while sharing almost nothing else in common. One may inhabit oceans beneath distant moons. Another may exist within vast computational worlds, orbiting unfamiliar stars. Another may experience time so slowly that a century passes like a single afternoon. And all of them, in their own way, would still be us. That is a beautiful thought. That humanity may not have a destination, only a direction toward greater understanding, toward greater awareness, toward forms of existence we cannot yet imagine. There is a phrase often attributed to science fiction writer Arthur C. Clarke. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. I have always wondered whether the same might eventually be said of consciousness. That, given enough time, enough wisdom, and enough survival, humanity itself may become something our ancestors would have mistaken for mythology. And perhaps that is exactly what every civilization eventually becomes. A bridge between what it once was and what it has yet to become. Still, despite all these possibilities, I suspect there are certain things that will endure. A desire to understand, a love of stories, a fascination with the night sky. Because long after our technologies have changed beyond recognition, there may still be someone, somewhere, asking the same questions we ask today. Who are we? Where did we come from? And what lies beyond the next horizon? Perhaps those questions are not signs of ignorance. Perhaps they are the defining characteristics of consciousness itself. There is something comforting about that no matter how much we change, curiosity may remain. Like a small flame carried carefully from one generation to the next. And if that is true, then humanity's future is not merely a story about survival. It is a story about continuation, about ensuring that the universe never loses its ability to wonder. Because consciousness, whatever it ultimately becomes, may be the rarest thing the cosmos has ever created. And perhaps its greatest achievement is not that it exists, but that it continues. Which brings us, at last, to the final question of our journey. After everything we have considered tonight, the silence of the stars, the possibility of solitude, the burden of responsibility, and the future that may await us, what if humanity never needed to find another civilization at all? What if, in the end, we were always enough? There is a question hidden beneath every other question we have asked during this journey. It has been there from the beginning, quiet, patient, waiting for us to notice it. For thousands of years, humanity has looked toward the stars, searching for company. We built myths around the constellations. We imagined distant civilizations. We listened carefully to the silence between the galaxies, hoping that one day it might answer us. And perhaps, someday, it will. But tonight, I would like to consider another possibility. What if we have been asking the wrong question all along? Not because there is anything wrong with wondering whether we are alone. That question is as natural as breathing. Curiosity is, after all, one of the oldest companions our species has ever known. But perhaps the deeper question has never been, is someone else out there? Perhaps it has always been, can we learn to appreciate what is already here? There is something uniquely human about believing that meaning exists somewhere else, on the next horizon, beyond the next mountain, among the next stars. Our ancestors crossed oceans believing that fulfillment waited on distant shores. Today, we build telescopes and wonder if it waits beneath distant suns. And yet, throughout history, humanity has repeatedly discovered the same thing. The places we seek often teach us to value the places we left behind. Mars teaches us to appreciate Earth. Silence teaches us to appreciate conversation. Distance teaches us to appreciate home. And perhaps loneliness teaches us to appreciate one another. Imagine, for a moment, that tomorrow we receive an answer, a signal, undeniable, proof that another civilization exists somewhere among the stars. How would the world change? For a little while, perhaps everything would feel different. There would be excitement, wonder, questions. But eventually, people would still wake up and make breakfast. Children would still laugh. Rain would still fall against windows. Life would continue, because the truth is that humanity has never been waiting for permission to matter. We matter because we are here, because consciousness exists, because somewhere in an ancient universe, atoms learned to care. I find that thought extraordinary, that out of all the things the cosmos might have become, dust, light, gravity, silence, it also became friendship, and music, and kindness, and stories shared late at night. There is an almost impossible beauty hidden within ordinary things. A parent reading to a child. Someone planting a tree they will never see fully grown. Two friends sitting together beneath a sky filled with stars. If humanity is alone, then these moments become even more precious. Not because they are rare on Earth, but because they may be rare in existence itself. There is a tendency to think of the universe as something separate from us, as though we are visitors passing briefly through a much larger reality. But perhaps that has never been true. Perhaps we are not in the universe. Perhaps we are something the universe is doing. After all, the atoms in your body were born inside stars. The calcium in your bones, the iron in your blood, the oxygen filling your lungs. Every part of you has traveled an unimaginable distance simply to be here. And now, after billions of years of cosmic history, those atoms have arranged themselves into someone capable of listening to these words. That feels important, not in the grand dramatic sense, but in the quiet sense, like discovering that you are always part of the story. There is an old idea that says human beings are lonely because we are separated from one another. I am not sure that is entirely true. I think we are lonely because we sometimes forget how connected we already are. Connected to each other, connected to every living thing that has ever existed, connected to a planet that has spent billions of years protecting us from the cold silence beyond its atmosphere, and connected in ways we are only beginning to understand, to the universe itself. Perhaps the search for extraterrestrial life has always been a mirror, not because it reflects our appearance, but because it reflects our values. We search for intelligence because we value intelligence. We search for consciousness because consciousness feels precious. And we search for companionship because, deep down, we know companionship matters. That realization changes the question entirely. Because if companionship matters, then perhaps the greatest tragedy would not be discovering that we are alone. It would be failing to appreciate the countless forms of companionship that already surround us. The people we love, the stories we inherit, the civilizations that came before us. Even this moment, you listening quietly beneath the same stars that inspired our ancestors thousands of years ago. There is a continuity in that, a thread connecting every human being who has ever looked upward and wondered. And perhaps that thread is enough. I think about the universe sometimes as an immense and ancient house. Most of its rooms remain dark. We continue opening doors, hoping to find someone waiting on the other side. And perhaps one day we will. But until then, there is still light in this room. There is still laughter here, still music, still questions, still love. Maybe that was never a small thing. Maybe it was always the miracle. There is one final thought I would like to leave with you tonight. If humanity truly is alone, then the universe spent nearly 14 billion years creating a single species capable of asking whether it had company. And perhaps, in the end, that was never a story about loneliness. Perhaps it was a story about recognition. The universe did not leave us alone. It gave us each other. And maybe, just maybe, we were always enough. As our journey draws to a close, there is only one thing left to do: to sit quietly for a few moments beneath the stars and remember how extraordinary it is that, against all odds, we are here at all. And so, dear traveler, we have arrived at the end of our journey. Somewhere beyond your window, the universe continues exactly as it always has. Stars are being born inside distant clouds of gas and dust. Galaxies are drifting silently through the darkness. Light that began its journey millions of years ago is crossing the cosmos at this very moment, unaware that it will eventually find its way to someone's eyes. Perhaps even yours. Over the last few hours, we have wandered together through some of humanity's oldest questions. We have considered the possibility that we are not alone, and the possibility that we are. We have imagined civilizations beyond our understanding. We have wondered whether Earth is one among countless worlds, or something unimaginably rare. We have asked whether we are the first minds to awaken in the universe, and whether, perhaps, we may one day be the last. These are large questions, far too large for any single night, and perhaps that is why they have remained with us for so long. Because some questions are not meant to be answered. They are meant to be carried, like old stories or familiar constellations. There is a tendency, when faced with the immensity of the cosmos, to feel small. And in a sense, we are. The Earth is small. Human history is brief. And each of our lives is only a tiny moment in a universe that has existed for billions of years. But I have come to suspect that small things are often underestimated. A single candle can illuminate a dark room. A single voice can break a profound silence. And a single world can become home to every poem, every song, every memory, and every dream that has ever existed. That world, against all odds, is ours. There is something comforting about realizing that the universe does not ask us to be larger than we are. It asks only that we exist, that we observe, that we wonder. And humanity has done all three remarkably well. For as long as we have been here, we have looked upward. Our ancestors did it beside ancient fires. Sailors did it while crossing unfamiliar oceans. Astronomers did it through the first telescopes. And tonight, somewhere on Earth, someone else is doing exactly the same thing. Looking into the darkness and asking questions. There is a quiet continuity in that, an invisible thread stretching across generations. Thousands of years separate us from the first human beings who gazed at the stars, and yet we share something deeply familiar with them. Wonder. Perhaps that has always been our greatest inheritance. Not cities, not technologies, but the simple desire to understand. And if one day we discover another civilization among the stars, I hope we greet them with the same curiosity that brought us this far. And if we never do, if the universe remains silent for another 1,000 years, or 1,000,000, then I hope we remember something equally important. That silence is not the same thing as emptiness, because for all its vastness, the cosmos is not entirely silent. It has oceans and forests and birdsong at dawn. It has laughter shared between friends. It has quiet conversations on sleepless nights. It has children asking impossible questions. And it has you, listening now. Perhaps that is enough. Perhaps it always was. There is one final image I would like to leave with you. Imagine the universe as an endless ocean beneath a moonless sky. For billions of years, it drifted in darkness. Then, one by one, small lights began appearing. A civilization here, another there, perhaps countless others beyond our reach, or perhaps only one. Either way, one of those lights is us, and tonight, our light is still shining. That matters more than we often allow ourselves to believe. So, wherever this journey finds you, whether you are still awake or already drifting toward sleep, I hope you carry one thought with you into the quiet hours ahead. You are part of an extraordinarily old story. A story written in starlight and time. A story that began long before the Earth existed and will continue long after we are gone. And for a brief moment, impossibly brief, on cosmic scales, you have the chance to witness it, to look back at the universe, to ask questions, to wonder. Few things could be more remarkable than that. Thank you for sharing this small corner of the cosmos with me tonight. And as the stars continue their patient journey across the sky, remember this: whether humanity is alone or surrounded by countless unseen neighbors, we remain part of something vast, beautiful, and deeply mysterious. And perhaps, in the end, that mystery was always the greatest companion of all. Sleep well, dear traveler. The universe will still be here in the morning.